sir. Are we good? Okay, a man who needs no introduction. If you don't know who Jonathan Kade is by now, can't help you. He's been just about every position.
So this presentation is actually in large part thanks to Mark Kedzior, who gave the initial version of it. So and also we both got some inspiration from Oceanside Photo and Telescope, OPT online. So anyway, without further ado, I am sure that many of you have gotten the same questions from friends and coworkers. I don't see a red light on the camera. I don't think it's recording.
It is.
Yes.
Okay. That I have, which is, what kind of telescope should I buy? And I'm sure that many of you have given the same response that I have given, which is, well, don't buy a telescope yet. Come out to an astronomy club meeting, come to our observatory, get a pair of binoculars, go up to dark skies. But some people still want a telescope. So you have to have something to tell them, and you know, sometimes it's exciting for people to start out with a telescope. So I never tell them that you shouldn't buy a telescope full stop, but I do encourage becoming a club member first. All right, so we are going to start from the cheap side of the spectrum. So what can you get for under $100? Well, this first scope is a first scope. I actually own one of these. I have observed the moon. I have observed Jupiter and its satellites. Let's see. I've observed the Orion Nebula. I have observed some open clusters. It is mostly a scope for looking at the moon, but it's an actual telescope for about $50, and it's hard to disagree too much with that. One of the most confusing things about it, and one of the reasons I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to people who've never used a telescope before, is that it doesn't have any kind of finder scope. So a first-time telescope user has to get used to looking at a right angle to where the telescope is pointed, which, you know, kids pick up things fast, but it's still a little bit strange. All right, if you want to get the absolute iconic first telescope, you can get one for in the $60 range. There are decent ones made by Celestron. Generally, we discourage getting telescopes of this nature because they tend to have unstable tripods. This Celestron has a better tripod than most in that price range, but still, you might want to consider something bigger. If you are interested in getting something for the adventurer in your starting off life, or if you want to get something to take along on trips without having, when you don't have the ability to bring along a big scope, you can get halfway decent scopes for about $70. The Meade Adventure Scope, you can get an Orion Fun Scope, 76mm, which is kind of a miniature version. It's essentially Orion's version of the first scope, but it comes with a red dot finder, and it's a really nice red dot finder. Also comes with better eyepieces than the Celestron version. Moving on up, you can get a Power Seeker, 80mm. It has slightly better optics, quite a decent tripod, about basically the same tripod you would get on an EQ1 mount from Orion. And then finally, on the high end of backpack telescopes, the Orion Go Scope. One thing about almost every one of these beginning refractors that I listed, they all have erecting diagonals, which means that when you look through them, you see stuff right side up. As those of us who are used to looking through telescopes at night know, that's a bad thing for seeing faint things in the sky, because faint things in the sky tend to be faint. And when you erect the image, you're actually putting it through extra glass and you're losing photons. So even the Explorer Scientific, which is very much targeted at astronomers, even their version of a 90mm, which is the only 90mm that you can get for under $100, still has an erecting diagonal. So you could put a different diagonal in, but at that point you might as well get a slightly more expensive telescope. All right, you want to stay under 150 bucks. This is the next size up from those First scopes and Fun scopes. The Orion Skyscanner is actually a very nice telescope. We bought one for the W.A.S Observatory. It's a scope that we can give to kids and have them actually start scanning around the sky on their own. And again, it has a nice red dot finder. It has comparatively good eyepieces. Much better than your run-of-the-mill department store telescope. On a similar note, the Meade Lightbridge Mini is even larger, 114 millimeters. Also very fast, a focal length of f4 basically. Both Meade and Orion include red dot finders. You may have noticed that all of Celestron's products come with the traditional straight through finder scope. These are really not helpful, especially when you're looking through the telescope at low magnification anyway. So I much prefer going with models that have red dot finders. All right, so now we can actually start to get into some decent aperture. So at $150, Celestron has a decent 127, 4.5 inch telescope. It is on a very frustrating mount, the EQ1 design, and you'll see that a little bit later. I discourage this for kids because, speaking as somebody who just graduated from engineering school, when I bought my first EQ1 mount, it's hard for my mind to grasp it, much less 7-year-olds. So the trade-off is you only get one eyepiece with it, but it does come with a 3x barbell. Orion has a very low aperture, 76 millimeter, long focal length, f9 scope that comes with a bunch of accessories for $150. It's an interesting option. I think there are much better ones in that price range. And then another potential travel scope on a nice tripod with round legs, the Meade Infinity. It actually comes with an EQ mount, although I think the Meade EQ mount is slightly easier to use than the Celestron and Orion. It also comes, for some reason, with 3 eyepieces, so you have more magnification options. Orion has another little refractor on so this is probably the only time you'll see a refractor telescope on a Dobsonian mount, but it's a nice little package. If you want to get a refractor telescope, a very short focal length refractor, it's certainly something to consider. And it's kind of cute. It looks kind of, for those of us used to seeing larger telescopes, it looks quite strange, but it looks pretty attractive. And finally, this is actually a real deal. If you want to get something in the 5-inch, 4.5-inch range, Celestron has an AstroMaster package that comes with extra eyepieces and filters and a really nice German equatorial mount, like a beginning German equatorial mount, for $150 at Costco. So it's, and unlike most Celestron starting packages, it comes with a red dot finder instead of a finder scope. So I was actually quite impressed by that deal. So this telescope I really want to love. A coworker of mine has it. Joe Toko, I know, has used it and enjoyed it. It is manufactured by Celestron for Astronomers Without Borders, which is a really wonderful nonprofit that seeks to equip people who are interested in astronomy throughout the world with the means to pursue it. Every dime of profit from these scopes goes to the charitable purposes of Astronomers Without Borders. And it's quite affordable, $200 for a 130 millimeter scope on a nice solid mount with a red dot finder and 2 decent eyepieces. So why do I say that I really want to like it, implying that I can't really recommend it? If you notice, there's this secondary here, and you see how it has a very strange design. There's this one threaded screw cylindrical bar holding up the secondary. There's no spider, there's no connecting rod. So if this screw gets loose, as happened to my coworker, there's really no way that we found to tighten it down. So it is kind of a strange design. There's a reason that this is usually not how reflectors support their secondary mirrors. So hopefully they will continue iterating on that and make it easier to use. This next scope is rather iconic. If you have seen Mark Kedzior's presentations about the library telescope program, this is the very scope that they use for the library telescope program. What's nice about it is that it's very easy for everyone to use, comparatively well made. Essentially, what the library telescope does is put a tamper-proof covering on the back end so you can't recollimate it unless you have the key. And they permanently install a zoom eyepiece so people don't have to fumble with eyepieces. For $200, it's really a decent start. The only drawback is that the eyepieces that come with it are pretty cheap Kellners. For some reason, if you get the same tube on an EQ1 mount, it comes with two much nicer eyepieces at the same price. So I guess it's cheaper for them to manufacture this really annoying and hard to use mount than it is to manufacture this little piece of plywood. I don't get it, but it would be nice if this came with the better eyepieces, and then I would find it really easy to recommend that. Meade has a 130 millimeter Lightbridge Mini, very similar. I think they actually have some of their higher end eyepieces with it, higher end beginning eyepieces. Now we can actually start getting into, at the $210 price range, we can start getting into folded optics. So this is a Maxitov Cassegrain design. Still quite small, 90 millimeter. You may notice that is a long focal ratio for a little tiny scope. So it's, if people are really obsessed with seeing Saturn and only Saturn, this would be a pretty decent choice for them. Obviously, you can see other things, but it's going to be, whatever eyepiece you put in it, it's going to be really, really high magnification. So it's a neat scope, but maybe less versatile than some of the short focal ratio scopes. Now, this is not quite as likable a deal as that Costco deal that I told you about, but this is for $100 more. You get a motor drive, so you can actually have a clock drive on it and it'll track whatever object you're looking for, which for beginners makes the experience, for everyone it can make the experience more enjoyable, but especially for beginners, keeping the thing that you're looking at in a telescope by using slow motion controls is one of the skills that you are slower to develop, especially if you are buying it for a family with several kids. It's nice for them to be able to just continuously look through it. All right, now we're going up to sort of the serious beginner price range, under 400. I threw this one on here, the Iaptron Cube Smart Star. I think a lot of people have seen these Iaptron Cubes. They're sort of the cheapest, most decent starting GPS system. The telescopes themselves, and for some reason they threw an erecting diagonal on this. For some reason the telescopes themselves that they are bundling with this, probably because of the low price point, are not really as good as some of the other telescopes that we've looked at in the small refractor category. All right, so now we can get to the full-scale, on-the-ground Dobsonian telescopes. So Orion makes smaller, full-size Dobs than this, but a 4.5-inch full-size Dob is not any more convenient than a 6-inch Dob, but it gathers much less light than a 6-inch Dob does. So for the $50, I would strongly recommend going with a 6-inch. At sort of the very high end of the backpack telescope world, you have the Meade ETX-80, which I know many people in this club started out with either the ETX-80 or the ETX-90. They were sort of pioneering go-to telescopes. And they're still manufactured. If you can go without a go-to function, you can get better optics and see a lot more. But if you really want go-to, it's not a bad choice. The Star Blast 6 is a fast F5 reflector that is on, it's kind of like the big brother to the Star Blast. And it comes with really nice eyepieces. They're 10mm and 25mm Plossels. The Orion 25mm Plossel is actually to this day, one of my most used eyepieces for public outreach. It's just extremely versatile and it's very high quality. So now we're getting to the Celestron MacCAS. So this is also a go-to telescope, 359. It comes with decent eyepieces, red dot finder. If you're going to be paying this much, 90mm in a MacCAS feels like a bit much to me. Going up $50 more, you get a 4-inch telescope. Sorry, I didn't update that aperture, with kind of a beefier mount as well. So if you're interested in folded optics telescope in the sub $400 price range, it's a pretty decent choice. And finally, my first telescope, the thing that I bought with my first paycheck after I paid off my student loans, the Orion SkyQuest XT-8. You may notice this is black. The SkyQuest we looked at a second ago is blue. So they have these plus models now. They have better hardware. The XT6 doesn't have a Crayford focuser, but the larger ones do. Generally, the plus models seem like they would be worth the upgrade to me, but again, it's going to add about $100 to $200 for the same size telescope to get the upgraded hardware. All right, now under $500, I don't know that I've ever bought a telescope for more than $500, except for maybe a personal solar telescope. So the Celestron NexStar 130, very capable go-to, capable scope, pretty good choice if you can swing that. My personal preference, if you're going to be in this price range, is a push-to small Dob. Easy for everybody to use. The push-to controls give you actually more sense of where you're going in the sky. Holding a controller, looking at the actual direction that your telescope is pointing, and actually moving it around, to me seems like a better learning experience for a beginner than hitting a button and having the telescope move on its own. So this is the big brother to the ETX-80 observer. So this is another, so now you're out of the backpack range, but you can still take this on a plane. It comes with very decent telescope, decent eyepieces, as well as a carrying case for the main body and a tripod bag. So you can bring that on your next eclipse trip. And finally, in the sub $500 range, Orion has their own 130mm. I personally am quite a partisan to Orion. They've always done well by me. They always donate a lot of stuff to the club for our banquet, and they just are really involved with the amateur astronomy community, so I have a very soft spot for them. Now, it wouldn't be a talk about astronomy if I didn't talk about some more expensive things. So, if you can spend $100 more than the budget, you can get a 5-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain Celestron. So the difference between the Schmidt-Cassegrain and the Maxitov Cassegrain is that the MacCAS has a single-piece glass front optic, whereas Schmidt-Cassegrain has the corrector plate and then a secondary mirror is a separate piece. Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes tend to, my understanding is that, you know, they tend to produce nicer images. You have more options for collimating them, so it's definitely worth considering if you can up that a little bit. And the focal ratio isn't quite as steep as some of the smaller ones. the Orion SkyQuest XT-8. So this is the same 8-inch reflector telescope, except now it has push-to controls. So that'll take you up to 749. And then you get to the telescope that I use the most, the SkyQuest 10-inch. This one is the Plus model. It has a Crayford focuser, comes with a 2-inch eyepiece, and is generally just high-quality fittings. And so if you can really, if you can increase your budget from 500 to 500 plus 50% of 500, you can get, this telescope has served me extremely well. It's still the telescope I use the most, and I've been doing this for a while. So
what's the weight?
So the XT10, the mirror itself is about 35 pounds. The stand alone is about 40 pounds. So the whole thing assembled, it's about 80 to 90 pounds. So it's definitely, obviously on the smaller side of things, much more portable, much easier to store. You can keep it in your car, you can take it on a plane. You're not going to take this on a plane. So
We have both the 8 and the 10. I can carry the 8 by myself. I cannot carry the 10 by myself.
So those are sort of my picks. I wish you good luck at the end of the month. Are there any questions that I can answer as somebody who hasn't bought a brand new telescope in 5 years now? Yes, Bob Berta.
It's not a question, it's just a suggestion that when you're starting out, you may also look into somebody's used telescope.
In fact, I meant to mention that, like, you can get amazing deals if you are willing to get a used telescope. I realize that in our consumer-driven culture, it's hard to give somebody something used for a gift, but they can get a much better experience out of it.
Or you can scrounge and save and cobble together pieces of this telescope and that telescope and that telescope and get yourself a really good one.
Get it one piece at a time, and it didn't cost you a dime. Jim Shadowski.
Just to comment that all Mac Sutovs are that high F ratio.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Ken.
Also, you see the eyepieces that are available. You can buy any number of eyepieces from a number of companies, including the ones you're buying the scope from, but be prepared to pay.
Yeah, essentially, getting a beginning telescope that comes with decent eyepieces is a really good decision, because if you, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, if you buy a cheap telescope and decide to get decent eyepieces, you're going to spend as much on eyepieces as you did on the scope.
Absolutely.
So
Easy.
and you can, you can spend an unlimited. If you buy eyepieces with green letters on them, you can spend more than this whole list. So
That's for sure.
all right, thank you very much, and good luck this holiday.